welcome in. It is Big Ten today. It is presented by Rally House. Great to have you with us on this Monday. Dave Revson, Howard Griffith. It was the first week that only included conference games in the Big Ten, and we had some really interesting ones.
Really? I mean, you start to think about some teams that really have really talented and loaded rosters that struggled a little bit in the first half but came back. And really, I think about SC in that case. Then you have a team like Illinois that goes on the road but couldn't complete what they needed to handle their business on the road. So this is really a fun time of the year because now we start, as we talked about last week, start to get a real gauge of where these teams are.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be able to talk about it here in the next hour, not just the two of us, but also Yogi Roth, who joins us. He has returned from his first ever Big Ten Network Green Room experience. Yogi, did it measure up to your expectations?
It did, because there was two waves of a great community, right? There was the morning group with you guys a little bit, right? Coach Gennardo was there, and then there was the evening, or shall I say into the morning as well, with you, Dave, and Ashley and everybody. So I had a blast, and kind of like our show, these teams are finding their identity, right? And I like, as what you said, Howard, regarding a lot of these teams, I look at Michigan. Okay, have they found a little bit of a formula now? How about Ohio State? Just found ways to lean on you. It wasn't perfect, but they still roll. Like, you got to play perfect against them. So there's little things that we're learning. And then there's still some question marks. Like, what's Purdue going to do on offense? How's Nebraska going to do after a win? Is it a reset? So I think there's storylines for days among all 18 teams.
Well, the beauty of it is we have days, but we just have this one day right now. So let's get into it, and we'll start with our big story. And as always on a Monday, it's the results of the past weekend. We will use the big board to guide us through them. Still 5 unbeatens in the Big Ten. All of them were in action this weekend, starting with Rutgers, which took down Washington Friday night. Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, all remaining perfect, all winning by at least 2 touchdowns. Indiana 5-0, first time in 57 years. USC, as was alluded to, the great second half. Michigan survives, and the Huskers winners at Purdue. Yogi, let's start with the one battle of ranked teams. It was in State College, and Illinois, man, they marched right down the field. Scored on their first drive and then never scored again as Penn State really put the clamps on them, and ultimately the Nittany Lions able to get the win here, doing it with the run game, which was awfully good, and doing it with the defense, which I think had its best performance of the year. What stood out to you?
Yeah, I think both of those, the efficiency of Drew Aller, also the creativity, right? You're looking at a variety of players. Ty Warren, again, the second straight week, he lines up in the backfield as the Wildcat, variety of different ways utilizing his skill set. I think the number one thing that stood out to me, though, was the defense. I mean, I think early on, we anticipated this being one of the best front sevens in America. And I thought through the first 3 weeks, you weren't really sure. Like, they didn't meet their level of standard. I thought they played at times to their competition. They set the tone against an Illinois team that is built on running the football. They want to lean on you. They have the back, and Fagan that has proven to do that. 34 rushing yards. I mean, period, end of story. I mean, think about that. And you referenced that first drive where Illinois had tremendous success. Nothing doing the rest of the game. This team, after that performance, I get it was at home, and their crowd, I think, was responsible for, I think James Franklin said 7 big plays, whether it was a timeout or a false start. But I think that this team proved to be worthy of championship conversation, not just in this league, but you start comping them to teams around the country. If you could play run defense like that, if you could move the football with those 2 elite backs, the efficiency and the explosive ability of Drew Aller, like Penn State, this is real. This is easily, to me, their most complete performance of the season.
I really like what they're doing defensively on that side of the football, particularly his defensive line. Zane Durant, I think, is he jumped out as a true freshman. Yeah. He jumped out as a true freshman a couple of years ago, and now he's really starting to take over and take control. And he really does an outstanding job. You add Abdul Carter to that, and they just send guys at you in waves. But let's remember, Illinois had an opportunity. I think they were inside the 10.
They were on the 2.
Yeah, and the ball.
And they ended up missing a 45-yard field goal.
They're going the wrong direction, right?
You
have a couple of miscues, and how do you know which way I'm going? But that's a different story. But you have to be able, when you go into a hostile environment like that, you have to be able to execute. And there were opportunities there where they weren't able to execute. And then once they got into the second half, you really saw this Penn State defense start to take over. One of the storylines coming in this thing, this is not unusual. We talk about quarterbacks being under duress. Mm-hmm. when they are under duress, they create problems, right? And I think that's what Tom Allen did a really solid job of really creating pressure on this offense, and they weren't able to execute.
Because I'm with Yogi, and I think you're intimating the same thing. We hadn't seen as much of that this year. Remember, this is the team that led the nation in sacks a season ago. They had 4 coming into this game. Now, there are lots of different ways to measure how much you affect a quarterback above and beyond sacks. And we all know that. That's not the be-all, end-all of statistics, but it's a fairly telling one. And when you go from 4 sacks for the entire year to 7 in one game, it shows you got things together. Maybe some of that on Illinois' offensive line, which I do think has appeared to be better this year, but was unable to run block and obviously had a lot of trouble protecting. It's interesting to look at Illinois because, as you say, Howard, this would have been a really different game had they been able to get those 2 yards when they were down there at first and goal. I'm a little surprised they weren't able to run the ball better. I mean, I guess you give a lot of credit to Penn State there, but they didn't get gashed in this game. We had talked about the degree to which Penn State was coming up with the big plays now under Andy Kolodnicki. That wasn't what happened here. There were it was so many of those kind of 10, 11-yard runs. They didn't give up a play longer than 20 yards, and I thought they represented themselves well.
No doubt about it. And, you think about being able to make strides on the defensive side, and we've talked about them being able to do that. But they still were sustaining. They weren't able to get off the football field. And when they were really having a lot of successes when they took the football away, right, in critical moments. And they have to continue to play the way they are. This Penn State team is really talented. There's no reason that Illinois can't continue to get better. And they will, because it's about really being able to run the ball and control the line of scrimmage.
Well, Penn State still perfect. They got UCLA coming to town on Saturday. The Illini head into a bye. Michigan and Minnesota, this looked like it was going to be a comfortable Wolverines win. Kalel Mullings over 100 yards on the ground. They were up 3 TDs in the fourth quarter before the Gophers mounted a furious rally, got within 27-24 after that spectacular TD catch, then attempted an onside kick, which they recovered, only to have it nullified by a controversial offside call. P.J. Fleck addressing the call at his news conference this morning.
What did you see after watching that onside kickback on tape?
Okay, so here's what I'll say about that. I had a conversation with the Big Ten commissioner and the officials. We know they are reviewing it, and we expect to hear something this afternoon. So that's all I'll say about the last play.
PJ, how do you look at going to tempo when the game script doesn't call?
All right, so interesting there from P.J. Fleck. We'll await whatever is going to come out, assuming that what he says is correct. I don't want to get too fixated on the call here, Yogi, because I do think there's more to this game than just that call. But what did you take from the call? I mean, the call's the elephant in the room. I feel like we have to at least discuss it.
Okay, so I have this clicker in my office here, and this is how I watch film early in the mornings in advance of our shows. And I've watched kickoff after kickoff. We've all done this for years. And the amount of times that it looks either just like the one we're looking at right now, or there's a head over the line on just traditional kickoffs to start a game or after a score. I mean, it happens to me all the time, and you never see it called. And that's what I'm so curious to see what the stance is. I mean, we see this picture, be curious to see what the league says, of course, later on today, as Coach Fleck referenced. But we see it all the time, guys. And usually you see a guy offsides a little bit. They just don't call it. So I'd be curious, what do the officials do from this point moving forward? Does it become a tighter call? Is there some leniency? If I'm on the other sideline and if you are over by an inch, I want it called in that instance. So I would love to be in those rooms that decisions get made around the letter of the law on this one, because I think it's a little vague, if we're honest, around what gets called and clearly what doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's close, right? It's a very close call. We know that might be a situation where we need to enter technology. Right?
Exactly. I mean, I think that's the thing that's odd to me, right, is that isn't reviewable because it is it's not a judgment call. I mean, kind of to your point, Yogi, hey, an inch offsides is offsides, okay? An inch not offsides is not offsides. So if there is a call, I mean, I understand why penalties as a general rule aren't reviewable because it's the old line about holding, where you call holding on every play. I mean, again, you kind of get down to there's judgment calls, how egregious is it? but there's a line, and you're either across the line or you're not across the line. And so to your point, maybe that's something for the rules committee.
And I think they have to look at it, right? And what forces rules committees to really come back and go over is plays like this when these types of things that happen. So I will be fascinating to see what the league has to say about it. But let's get to the game a little bit.
Yeah, right. And let me frame it this way. Let me frame it this way for you, Howard, and then Yogi, you can chime in afterward. Does the Gophers come back tell us more about Michigan or Minnesota?
I would go Minnesota.
Okay.
Right? Because I think you can make the comment, okay, they may have come out flat, but this is a team that still fights, and they're in this thing, right? These games, they haven't been blown out. They go out and take care of their business, and a play here and a play there, and you win the game. So I really like the fact that Minnesota was able to mount the comeback the way they were. And we know some of the issues that Michigan has, and they're going to give up some plays, and they have offensively. What we saw in the second half was Minnesota being able to execute.
Yogi, your take?
Yeah, this one's been fun for me to dissect because I'm calling Minnesota against SC this weekend. So you watch it once in real time, you watch it a couple more times after the fact, and I'm probably with you, Howard, a little bit on this one. I think we learned a little bit more about Minnesota in this regard of they've got a gritty nature to them. Remember, they also have a punt blocked, right? That kind of changed the nature of this game to a large degree, in my opinion. I just think that they're like a few other teams in this league where the margins they have to win. They have to win on special teams. They can't turn the ball over. Right? They did a beautiful job, masterful, really, when you look at the end of the first half in terms of the explosive play, getting 3 points, getting a little momentum. I just think this is this team this year. When you look at some of the injuries they've had, the players that are out, they have minimal margin for error, but they're a tough out. I mean, I like how they ran the football with more efficiency this week than they did in the second half, of course, in the Iowa game. I think defensively, they ran into one of the elite backs in America in Mullings again, just kind of, he just leans on you and then he's just going to break one. But overall, I think they did a nice job of mixing up coverages, bringing pressure, showing different looks, trying to confuse Alex Orji. At times they got him, and at times he got them. So I think overall their record probably doesn't reflect exactly who they are. I think they'll be a tough out for every single team they face, including SC this weekend.
And again, when you look at the run defense and the issues they had there, they were dramatically better. They outgained Michigan. They had more first downs than Michigan. So there's a lot of positives to take out of it from Minnesota's point of view. I do want to get a quick thought on Michigan. I mean, the pass game was marginally better, but Alex Orji threw an interception, which really tended to swing the momentum toward Minnesota. We know what they've got with Kalel Mullings. This is the second straight week where they played really well out of the gate, and then they let the opponent back into the game in the second half. What do you make of it from Michigan's point of view?
I think this is going to be an offense that's going to continue to evolve and get better as the season goes on. When you talk about Alex Orji throwing the football, this was the most attempts he's had since he's been, playing the position at the collegiate level. So he's going to continue to get better, but they just have to continue to run the football so that they can work him into a situation where he can get into a rhythm as a passer.
Michigan goes to Washington, the national championship game rematch, and then as Yogi mentioned, he's got that game, Minnesota and USC. That one will be in Minneapolis and here on the network. And USC will enter that game against the Gophers with some momentum after topping Wisconsin. Badgers led it by 11 at the half, but the second half was all Trojans. Outscored Wisconsin 28-0 after the break. USC just wore the Badgers down. They ran 82 plays to just 50 for Wisconsin as USC outgained them 205-82 in the final 30 minutes. They improved to 3-1 on the year. A Yogi second straight slow start for USC. They weren't quite able to overcome it against Michigan, although they did come back to take the lead. But then, of course, the Wolverines won it there at the end. But here they just swallowed Wisconsin up in the second half. What do you make of it from USC's point of view?
Well, I think there's two different takes, right? One is immediately after the game, you're thinking that, right? Playmakers showed up. They held Wisconsin, I think, 82 yards in the second half. Great adjustments at the halftime. And then also, I think reality sets in a couple days later, which is what we do the Monday Schmooze, and that's what it's all about. And I think if they play the way they did against Wisconsin, I don't know if they beat Minnesota. I think they have to find a way to put 4 quarters together of football. I think especially when you look at the quarterback play they're going to face this week, I think Max Brosmer has the ability with some of the receivers we saw make plays against Michigan, that if they can jump on SC and it's that halftime deficit on the road, we'll see if SC can continue to live like that. I don't think they can, especially when you look at their schedule and Penn State coming to town and the rest of the Big Ten slate. But what they have that not many teams have, I think, other than probably Oregon and Ohio State, right off the top of my mind here, is the playmakers. I mean, we talked about it in the preseason. I think this sophomore class of receivers is as good as anybody in America. Jacoby Lane had his coming out party, first ever 100-yard game, a career day for him. You look at him making plays like this, the catch that he makes on the sideline, look at that, just absolutely dynamic. Another touchdown that was contested, and then Deuce Robinson in the red zone right here. This is the pressure. Miller Moss gets smoked in the face. Deuce makes a great grab. I mean, these guys are gifted. And then I think it's Miller. And I love what Lincoln Riley has said to us many times, and he said after the game, like, if you want to see a soft team, look at the quarterback. You want to see a tough team, look at the quarterback. This is a tough dude in Miller Moss. We all know the story of waiting his time to play at the school that he loved, but how he's carrying this team. I've always felt that he was going to be the steady, and that's what he is. When they need somebody to show up, he doesn't have to be Superman like Caleb Williams. He just has to deliver the rock in the right spot. He looked a little like Caleb on that QB sneak. Not exactly as athletic, but it was impressive, at least the first half until the fall. But overall, he's the guy that gets them going. I think they come on back. I think it's also noted that they played a lot of new guys defensively, right? We know the story around Bear Alexander no longer playing this season, opting to redshirt instead. They're rotating defensive linemen. They had to play a couple linebackers, guys in the secondary. The minutia elements that we'll get into the game Saturday. But overall, I like where they're at. I don't love where they're at. I don't think they can continue to live and be a CFP caliber contender if they only play in half of football.
I think what's interesting when you talk about the toughness of your quarterback, and Yogi, I think you're absolutely right. When your quarterback takes some of the shots that he's taken over the last couple of weeks, standing in there delivering the football for big plays, that tells everyone around, hey, well, if he can stand in there, we've got to be able to do that. Are the slow starts concerning? Absolutely they are. But the fact that they've been in these situations and know that later on that they can put things together and get going, I think that gives that team a lot of confidence that, okay, if we get down early, we still have the ability, because of the playmakers that we have, because of who's under center, that we'll be able to get back into the game. And I think that's part of it. It's the early part of the season. We're used to seeing this team light up the scoreboard, right? So when you don't see that, it's concerning to somewhat. But I think this is just the evolution of them trying to play. I do like on the defensive side, they're having to play a bunch of people. Because if you want to make a run, this is the true reality. If you want to make a real run into the playoffs, make the playoffs and get into it, you better have a deep roster of players that are going to be able to compete. And there you don't have some of those big drop-offs that you may have at some programs.
So tale of two halves for them. Same for Wisconsin. And we'll get into the Badgers more as the week continues, but still feels like a little bit of an identity crisis.
Still trying to find their way.
Yeah. You get into shotgun on 4th and 1 and unable to gain that yard, just 82 yards of offense in the second half. The first half certainly encouraging from Wisconsin's point of view. There were some positives, no doubt. Ohio State improving to 4-0 in convincing fashion, topping Michigan State 38-7. Will Howard threw for 2 scores, one to Emeka Egbuka, and the other to the outstanding freshman Jeremiah Smith, who continued to dazzle. He also had a TD run in the game. Buckeyes' 43rd straight win against unranked opponents, extending the nation's longest such win streak. And let's start with the Buckeyes. Yogi, the talent is undeniable, and it shined very brightly against Michigan State.
Yeah, look, I know there's a lot of criticisms around their schedule, which they don't make necessarily. They don't get to choose, I guess you should say, if you're Ryan Day and the players, you just got to go play it. And they rolled in their first few games. Then they get into conference play, go on the road. The place was bonkers. You know, they're honoring the, former elite head coach there. And what do? They battled early on, and they took their shots from Michigan State. Michigan State had opportunities, right? They had the ball 3 times inside the 20, either a turnover or turnover on downs. But then they do what all great teams do. Like they take your best shot, and then you look up and you're down 3 scores. And that's really what this game was. It wasn't like dramatic domination. Michigan State, it's not like they couldn't be on the same field, but they just proved that they're deeper, they're more talented. If you do not take advantage of the minimal shots you get against Ohio State, you will not beat them. And I think that is going to be their story all year long. They've proven to be an elite team, one of the best teams in America on this stage. And I just love watching all elements. I mean, you can break down every element of the game. I'll talk quarterback play. Sure, it was fascinating. Devin Brown came in when they needed somebody, threw a touchdown pass. You want to talk run game? We got two of the best backs in America. Offensive line, moving the rock, play calling. Chip Kelly just keeping you on your heels for a lot of this ball game. And to me, though, it was the defense that stood out. They shut down the run game. If Jonathan Smith and Michigan State are going to be successful, they're going to have to run the football. They shut it down. This front seven is real, and I think they proved to America on a pretty big stage that they're worthy of all the dialogue that this roster has.
When you start to talk about the maturity of a football team, in this game it showed up, and I tell you where I go and what I gravitate to. I want to know what you're doing when you don't have the football in your hand, when your numbers are not called. And I'm telling you, I was so impressed with these receivers and these backs playing without the football. I'm so impressed that I'm telling you I'm going to do a breakdown on it Saturday because it was amazing to watch the selflessness of these players really going out and doing what they need to do to win football games. And it really is amazing to watch because your number's not being called. The ball's away from you, and you are going after those defenders, doing an outstanding job of blocking down the field. Across the entire roster, it was that way. But because I thought Michigan State did some really good things.
They did. Like, I agree 100% with what Yogi said. Like, Michigan State, this almost sounds derogatory. I don't want it to come off this way, but like, they belonged on the same field with Ohio State, and the implication is that you expect them not to belong on the same field. So I don't want that to be construed negatively. But like the first half, they went toe to toe, except for, as Yogi said, like they got down to the 20 and they just did things that prevent you from winning football games.
Yeah, I like what they're doing with the quarterback. I think, we continue to talk about what his ceiling is. We don't know where it is because he has so much room to improve. But I thought his handling, his football, the ball handling, booting, moving him around, really did some good things. And this is a Michigan State team that's going to continue to get better. But Ohio State is just so deep. They're just so deep and understand what they're doing right now and what Chip Kelly is doing and putting on film really are going to cause some problems for teams down the line.
Yeah, no doubt. Ohio State, as we said, impressive performance for them. They will take on Iowa. Oregon, meanwhile, will move on and get a game against Michigan State. And the Ducks got ready for the Spartans with a win over UCLA behind another big game from Dylan Gabriel, which gets us to our big stat. Gabriel accounting for 303 total yards in a 34-13 win over UCLA. That moves him past former Duck Bo Nix into second place all-time in NCAA history. In terms of total yardage, he trails only Houston's Case Keenum, who's about 3,000 yards ahead. And certainly not crazy to think Gabriel could pass him, particularly if the Ducks make a run into the postseason. Yogi, this is the second straight game where it has felt like Oregon is the team we expected them to be.
Yeah, I think much like the conversation with Ohio State, I mean, you have your shots, you got to take them. I think Oregon, what we've seen this team become since week one is on the offensive line, come together, find the group that meshes well, utilizing the legs of the guy we just saw on the screen, now engaged. Congrats, Dylan Gabriel. Right? So I think when I look at this team, I see a team just continually growing. Their schedule sets up nice. They want to get guys on the move. It sounds like that man right there, Terrence Ferguson, at least post-game from Dan Lanning, said he's going to be okay. He left the game. He's one of their best players. He might be their highest draftable offensive player on that roster. So hope that he is good. And then they protected the quarterback. I mean, they didn't allow a sack against UCLA. UCLA tried to be aggressive, I thought, defensively a lot in this game. And then they got playmakers down the field, whether it's Trayshawn Holden or Tez Johnson. I mean, they are loaded in that regard. And then I think defensively, I mean, the linebackers are, to me, what really stood out. They have so much speed there. Devin Jackson might be the most improved player I've seen from last year, now coming into this year, of course, from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. But he might be the fastest linebacker in America. I mean, he's a 400-meter guy. I mean, he could just fly coming from the Midwest. I think he's from Indianapolis. So he and Bryce Betcher, we saw Jeffrey Bassa back. Like, this group defensively, I think, is finding their flow a little bit. It'll be fun to watch them face a guy they know really well, of course, in Jonathan Smith and that style on a short week.
Yeah, you think about what they were defensively and what's happening on that side of the ball, holding the team 1 of 10 third down situations, and really not allowing them to stay on the floor on the field. Oregon ran 30 more plays than they did, so they weren't able to stay out there and really keep the ball away. So your defense ends up wearing down. But this Oregon team, again, and just like we've already talked about, to me, they're coming into form. And they're just, continuing to work through their kinks and finding the players that are going to be able to be big-time playmakers that they have, getting the ball to them. Early, the offensive line struggled a bit. They look to have really, things have slowed down for that group. Now they're playing really well right now.
Really encouraging, too, that as Yogi alluded to, the areas that weren't so good early on have gotten better. The offensive line, I think, is the most obvious one. And, defensively held UCLA to 172 yards. Ethan Garber's got beaten up in that game, tough, so not a ton to feel great about for UCLA. Does not get easier for them. We talked about the Ducks hosting Michigan State. The Bruins go to Penn State coming up here next week. Another week, another win for the red-hot Hoosiers. They're 5-0 for just the third time ever. First time in 57 years after topping Maryland 42-28. All 5 of the wins by double figures. First time they've done that in 118 years. Their 244 points are the most ever through 5 games, and the voters have taken notice. They're back in the polls for the first time in 3 years. And Yogi, what I thought was most impressive is they did not play a perfect game. Far from it. In fact, they had 4 turnovers in this game, a team that hadn't turned it over all year. But what stood out to me, and we talked about this on the final drive, not only did Maryland not score after any of those Indiana turnovers, they didn't get a first down after any of those Indiana turnovers. Their response when they were pushed for the first time this year was as good as you could ask for.
Yeah, I think it's really easy because it's Coach Cignetti and you think offense with him and you know about Curtis Rourke and you reference, the turnovers. He had 2 of them, right? He had 2 interceptions on back-to-back plays. But you're right about the defense. And this defense with Mr. Fisher in the middle, Aiden Fisher, their star inside linebacker, their D coordinator, Bryant Haynes. I mean, they've got a really unique style of play. I mean, to get into the weeds, they want their defensive linemen to just create havoc vertically up the field. But they can line up anywhere they want, right? They can line up, very tight to the center. They can line up as wide as they want. They just got to get to their area. Then the linebackers really playing off of them, Fisher being the key guy. I thought that was really impressive. Going up against a team in Billy Edwards, who I think went 28-32 in their previous game. Ty Felton, I think, had 14 grabs, just taking the nation by storm as a wideout. And they shut a lot of that down in this ball game, especially when they had to, right? You're talking about sudden change. Phenomenal. Not a first down. Are you kidding me? And at home. So that stood out. And I think that is why we need to talk about Indiana in a different way, right? It's not just a great story. This is a team playing really good football, right? When they turn it over, they respond. Their defense has been impressive. I think it was a much better outing than they had a week earlier against Charlotte. So I can't wait to track this team. It's emerging as one of the most fascinating stories, I think, in the country.
Yeah, you think about what they're doing on the field, that's obviously really what stands out. But you also think about just how Indiana decided to make him the head coach, right? They went in a totally different direction, getting a veteran coach that had proven himself at lower levels. But I go back to the halftime comments that he made. We talked about the interceptions that were thrown. He was not rattled at all. He says, yes, they've happened, but we're going to bounce back from that. And to have that calm, because you talk about a head coach from the front of the room being able to really get his team to understand what he's trying to do, it is there. It's amazing really to watch just the mentality of this team and the way they're playing. And it's just not one guy on the offensive side of the football. No. They've got a lot of guys that are contributing each and every week.
That's what's amazing to me, too. I mean, there are lots of things that are really impressive, but that they hit on as many guys as they hit on out of the portal. Like, it's one thing if you say, well, we convinced one great running back to come here and one great receiver.
Yeah.
But they had 6 different players score touchdowns. They had 10 different players catch passes. They've got a bevy of good receivers. They've got a nice stable of running backs. The line is good. Again, it's every level. And part of it is he brought a lot of guys from JMU who he knew could play. And it's different in this day and age now in the portal era, kind of to your point, Howard. If you do hire a sitting head coach, he's got connections with players that perhaps he brings with him. In this case, he did. But yes, I'm with you. Like, it's the way that they have done it. It's not just that they have done it. Yeah. It's the way they've done it that feels really sustainable, Yogi, because it's not just relying on one or two superstars.
Well, it's a really unique point that you all made, because ADs who are watching this right now may be reevaluating. Like, hey, should I take somebody from maybe a lower level, because we're trying to go get those players anyway. I mean, that's just kind of how the portal works. And I think this thing that stands out to me among those transfers, I think 19 of them came in from other universities. 14 of them were all conference at some level wherever they played. So he brought in a bunch of winners. And then I think about, like, if I was a player in that locker room, what he tells his team prior to going out against UCLA, Charlotte, I'm sure he said it this weekend, which is, when you come back to this locker room, do not be surprised when we beat our opponent in the style in which we're going to beat them. They've proven that every week. They're going to go on the road, and they're going to go face Northwestern this weekend, but they got a good shot to go do that again and then enter a bye week. So I just love the confidence. It's grounded, right? He's very direct with his team, and they believe the results because of the guys that you referenced that came from JMU. Say, hey, just trust this guy. He knows what he's doing. It is going to be a reset, because he wasn't the hot young coordinator, and I love that move by ADs, but I think the style in which the era of football is in now, I think it's worth noting of, hey, do we get a guy at the FCS level that might bring over half of his roster, and they were really successful? It might prove a couple ADs to just pause on the evaluations once we get to the back half of the season and some jobs become available.
You think about Lance Leipold, you think about Kalen DeBoer. I mean, these are guys who succeeded at a lower level as well before moving up. So it's a formula that's starting to work for people. As Yogi said, Indiana goes to Northwestern. Maryland bye week probably comes at a good time, a little banged up. Ty Felton, Caden Prather, they also play Northwestern next, but it comes after the bye. What about Rutgers, Yogi? Outgained at home by 222 yards. And yet they figure out a way, knock off Washington, a Huskies team that made a lot of mistakes in this game that did themselves in. But Rutgers' formula working once again, and it keeps them unbeaten.
I think that's what it is, right? It's the, just want to make sure I get it right. It's the chop, right? It's the formula of the chop from Coach Chiano. He's been doing that, from back in the Big East when I played against his teams at Rutgers to now. And I think that's just who this team is, right? He's told you guys that many times. He's told me that in training camp as well. And this is a team that's got to play tough defense. They have to be a physical out. They have to control the football. And then the discernment of Ethan Kaliak-Manis showed up again on Friday night. You look at the numbers, there's no way that you'd think that Rutgers came out on top. But because of the style in which they play, they did, and that is going to be their model, to get into a relative street fight, be a biker gang, and just try to throw the opponent around a little bit, take advantage when they make miscues. They did that. Try to see if they can hurt themselves. They did that a lot. And then don't let them breathe. They just end it, and that's what they did in this game behind Kyle Monungai.
It's amazing to watch this team, continue to watch them, because what you always knew about this team is they're going to play hard, 4 quarters. That's never been a question. And now they're starting to get the pieces that can get them over the hump, even though they were outgained. This is a team that you just don't feel like it's going to be out of a football game because of the mentality. Again, we've talked about 2 teams, Indiana and now Rutgers. And listen, I don't like this Washington team. If they can get some of these mistakes fixed, which they can, this is a tough football team as well. There's some coaches in this conference that have really stepped up and really, I think, not only the quarterback play, but their coaching style have elevated their programs.
You average about 8 yards a play and you don't give up a single tackle for loss and you lose the game. That's a head scratcher for sure for Washington. So Rutgers moves on. They've got Nebraska this week. And speaking of the Huskers, Nebraska, ugly first half against Purdue. It was scoreless at the break, Yogi. But then in the second half, Nebraska, 1 week after they kind of fell apart in the second half against Illinois, they really did flip the script and exerted their dominance.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's some holes that they got to clean up, but I think, they said it after the game. When you're talking to Matt Rule, you hear his press conference, and he said, this was a game that our guys needed, and we're a team that's just continually growing. I think because it was Nebraska and because of what they did to Colorado early in the season, we're thinking they're back, and back like back in the day back. And this is a team that's just going to be kind of like UW, Rutgers, Indiana. They're going to be a tough out for everybody. I think there's this second tier of teams in this league now that nobody's going to want to face, but you got to. That's just the way the schedule works. And I like this win for them. You look at halftime, how are they going to handle this thing? Right, coming off a dramatic and emotional loss in overtime at home. And they came out, and especially freshman quarterback Dylan Raiola, he didn't try to be somebody that he wasn't. Another extremely efficient game from him. They didn't have some of their best players, right? They had to deal and navigate that. And they had to deal and navigate with natural frustrations. They didn't convert a third down in the first half. I think they finished 1 of 8 in the ball game, and they got a win. I think you go back and you show your team that and say, look at all these things, fellas, and we still came out victorious. This is a positive for us as they keep building this thing in year 2 under Matt Rule.
If you can continue to clean up some of the small things, this team can continue to get better. But you saw in that first half, it was almost like it was a little bit of a hangover from the week before. And it kind of felt that way. And they were able to go in and reset. And I think that's a big part of believing in who you are, because quite frankly, the story was, okay, here we go. And they were able to put the brakes on that and come out and play better and come out of that with a victory.
One of the things that really stands out to me about Nebraska, they were +1 in turnover margin, or +5 on the season. The last time Nebraska had a positive turnover margin, you want to guess what it was? 2016. They haven't had a positive turnover margin since 2000. So you talk about, like, what are we doing differently? It's staggering, right? Talk about what are we doing differently. That's one of the things that they are doing differently. They also played really good defense in this game, so good, in fact, that Purdue made a change at offensive coordinator. They let Graham Harrell go, made that announcement yesterday, so we'll find out a little bit more from Ryan Walters as to how they are going to move forward. But the offense has really struggled in these last 3 games after a good performance in the opener against Indiana State. New AP Top 10, Alabama is on top after its dramatic win over Georgia. The Tide jumped Texas. Ohio State remains at number 3. Oregon and Penn State both up 2 spots after their wins. Big Ten with 5 of the top 11. SEC also with 5 in that group. Mentioned earlier, Indiana is into the poll. Illinois remains in. They're 24th. Nebraska, Iowa, Rutgers all receiving votes. So let's go big picture. If the season ended now, and if the college football playoff rankings directly reflected the AP poll, the Big Ten would end up with 4 teams in the college football playoff as of now: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. Look, there's a lot of football between now and then, but you've got other teams that would be in the conversation. USC would be the first team out, in fact, in that scenario, Yogi. So what do you make of where the Big Ten stands?
I think it's really healthy. I really do, because then you look at some of the wild cards, and whether that's Indiana or Rutgers, and as you take a look at their schedule, you say, well, what if they end up with 1 loss and based on the tiebreaker, make the champ game or don't make the champ game? Let's just say they make it and they lose. I think it's very safe to assume that whoever's in the championship game in the Big Ten is going to the playoff. Let's just say they don't make it based on tiebreakers. If they got 1 or 2 losses, which I think is very realistic as you look at their schedules, it's based on their playing today entering week 6, you say to yourself, well, how do you keep them out? So I think there's just going to be positioning left and right among, of course, different leagues, voices like ours, and many others. And Notre Dame, of course, always a wrinkle in it. But I think the good thing is the non-conference wins. Look at SC beating LSU. If they're out, you start all of a sudden arguing for the teams that they played, right? They have Michigan, they lost, they have Penn State, and kind of go down the schedule. So that'll be, I think, how this thing really gets decided, is who played who, when did they play them, and eventually the strength of the leagues will probably dictate a lot of whoever that last 1 or 2 slots go to.
And I think this is what we really wanted.
Yes.
With the 12-team playoff, right?
A lot of teams are going to be engaged. A lot of fan bases are going to be engaged.
Absolutely. I mean, because now you say, okay, Indiana, look at their schedule, right? Rutgers, look at their schedule. Okay, what happens with Michigan as they continue? Can they all of a sudden hit a streak? So we have so many teams that are right there, that are in position, in striking distance, that this is what the fan bases, and I think what everyone that loves college football wanted to see, having so many teams still engaged at this point in the season.
And if you want to talk rooting interest for the Big Ten, trying to get 4 or 5 in, you're rooting against Notre Dame, and they've got a pretty cushy schedule, particularly with Florida State. So those certainly, you need USC to beat Notre Dame, but Florida State obviously not playing well. You're probably rooting against one of those ACC teams. You need to keep the ACC a one-bid league. Miami and Clemson, the only ones who feel like they have a chance. And then the Big 12 is just kind of so up in the air right now. There's a lot of decent teams.
But that's what.
Yeah, but that's what's going to be fun.
About. Yeah,
that's what's going to be fun here. It is really cool to be at this point in the season and be talking about some of those teams. Indiana, Rutgers. Dramatic conclusion of our show next. We're handing out helmet stickers, tons of worthy candidates. Who comes away with the highly coveted, completely imaginary award? Stick around. It is time to go around the Big Ten. Let's focus in on volleyball, where second-ranked Nebraska looked the part this weekend, taking care of both of the LA schools. Topped UCLA 3-1 Friday, then swept 20th-ranked USC yesterday. Nebraska's 12-1. Next up for them, a matchup Thursday at Illinois. That one over on FS1. The hoop season is nearly upon us, and the best way to get yourself ready is to park in front of the TV all day Wednesday and Thursday for our Media Day specials. The women are on Wednesday, the men are on Thursday. 7 hours of coverage both days, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. It is time for helmet stickers, rewarding the top performances from the week that was. Yogi, lead us off. Where are you going with your helmet stickers?
Well, I'm going to stay right here in sunny Southern California and go with Jacoby Lane, the second-year player for SC. First 100-yard game, some incredible catches, big-time plays. Jacoby Lane, congratulations. Welcome to the party, and I'd imagine Minnesota's going to try to make sure you don't do the same thing. Then I'm going to stick at the receiver position, Jeremiah Smith. The one-handed grabs had my oldest son, Zane, last night practicing them before bed. So thank you for doing what you do, Jeremiah Smith. And then finally, I'm going to my man who writes the best emails among anybody in the Big Ten, and Kurt Signetti. Not only did he write one on Friday saying, hey, don't study, don't party, just show up at the game. You can do that later. But he did it after the game, before he even may have celebrated. And he said, look, and now it is time to study. So congratulations to Indiana and Coach Sig.
The weekdays are for studying. The weekends are for Hoosier football. Howard, who you got?
Abdul Carter. I'm going to tell you, he is really, as you talk about playing the defensive end, the linebacker position, he almost had a pick in this game as well. He's really playing well. His ability to affect the game when he's not even getting to the quarterback, forcing the quarterback up in the pocket and really helping out his team. He's doing a tremendous job of that. Aiden Fisher at Indiana. Man, you talk about it, and Yogi's done a great job of talking about how these linebackers have to clean up for the defensive linemen and the defensive linemen in the way they go. But just his leadership of the team has been outstanding. Emeka Egbuka. I don't need to see another catch from him. I watched him pull and knock down a linebacker. He got a pancake for that, I'm sure. His ability to block downfield and the way he's leading that unit, I think is outstanding. And you can point at one of your best players doing a bunch of the dirty work. Man, that's when you got something special, and they really do have something special going offensively.
Might be an actual helmet sticker.
Might be.
In it for him.
It probably got a few.
They've been known
some of the blocks
he had. A few of those out in Columbus. Some great wide receivers in this conference. It's going to be tough to come up with the all-conference team. We will see you next time on Big Ten Today.